So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this one. This is the October session of the Technology Enhanced Learning Community of Practice, or TELCoP for short. I think this may be our last one of the year. Robert and I haven't discussed it, but we usually do once every 6 weeks. And if you do the math, that kind of gets us to the end of November. I'm not sure if we'll have another one in November or December. So this may be the last TELCoP of the year. And it's exciting that we get an opportunity to get somebody external to the university to come and have a chat to us. And that is Dr. Jenelle Benson from the Centre for Teaching and Learning at Southern Cross University. And hopefully everybody can see my screen and you can see the title of the presentation there. But just to give you a little bit of context, where I met Jenelle is actually at University of Sydney, where earlier this year we did a Australian Learning and Teaching Leaders Roundtable on generative AI, where we kind of collected everybody's ideas about generative AI, what they thought was good, what they thought was not so good, and kind of gathered it all together so that we could sort of think about what we were doing in AI and higher education in the future. And that was led by Danny Liu from the University of Sydney, and I was one of the kind of co-organisers along with Tim Fawns at Monash Uni. And Jenelle was there, and she talked a lot about what they're doing at Southern Cross. And one of the things that she said is we're really focused on making sure the students know how they're supposed to use this tool. And at the time, I went, oh, that's interesting and a little bit different. And so almost immediately afterwards, I said to Jenelle, hey, come and talk to the TELCoP and talk to CQU staff about artificial intelligence and what you're doing at SCU, as per the title, the best practice on setting the AI expectations, which I thought was really interesting. And so that's the context of where I met Jenelle and why she's here. In terms of the outcomes of that workshop that we did, it was published last week. This wasn't planned, but it just so happens that white paper from that workshop was published last week. So if you go and have a look at me on LinkedIn, I reposted it last week. It's available now for everybody to have a look at what everybody said from many universities across the country about what they're worried about and what they're bullish about in terms of artificial intelligence and generative AI in 2023. But let's get on and do a little bit of an intro. So I'm going to do what I always do and start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we're living on or we're working on. And as I always say for the TELCoP, this is very broad for CQ University. And, you know, we could be talking about lots of different traditional people from lots of different lands. I'm currently, as you know, you've probably heard me say it, on the Gold Coast at the moment. At my house on the Gold Coast, so there's the Gumbear people. But if I was on campus, then that would be the Turrbal and the Jagera people in Brisbane. And again, as I always say, if you want to type in the chat what traditional lands you're on, then that would be great as well. So we, as I said, acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that we're meeting and paying our respects. I didn't say that, to elders past, present, and emerging. And as I said before, this is the Technology Enhanced Learning Community of Practice. I throw this slide up every time. I'm not going to read it for you, but this gives you the visions and what we're trying to achieve with the TELCoP. In short, sharing, as a community of practice does, sharing best practice in technology enhanced learning to help predominantly at this stage CQ University staff with what they're doing in technology enhanced learning. And I've mentioned before, but we'll mention as always, that all of the episodes are on YouTube. There is the link for you. It's called Professor Tech's TechTube. That's me, Professor Tech. So Professor Tech's TechTube, and you can go and find all of the recordings. All of our presenters are usually quite happy for us to share their recording on YouTube. So go and have a look. And if you'd like, subscribe to the channel. And if enough people subscribe to the channel, then this URL will change to youtube.com/ProfessorTech or something like that, right? A bit easier to remember. But yeah, as I said to you, really, the key thing is to talk about technology enhanced learning. And so here's who you're going to see today. The first and foremost, this is me, Michael Cowling. I'm an associate professor of ICT in the School of Engineering at Tech, but also my superhero name, my secret superhero alias is Professor Tech. You might find out a little bit about Professor Tech if you Google that. The other presenter, the other champion for our TELCoP is Robert Vanderburg. You might get a chance to hear a little bit from Robert as we go along. He's going to moderate the session for us today. So as Jenelle talks, and she's going to start with a little bit of a presentation, if you have any questions, then type them in the chat, and Robert will sort of gather together and, you know, synthesize some of those questions and will act as your proxy, stick up his hand and ask Jenelle questions at the end when we get to the Q&A. I've also got some prepared questions for Jenelle as well. And as well as that, of course, if you want to just ask a question, you can just stick up your hand and we're happy to do that as well. But we find with a few people in the room, it's sometimes nice to give you the opportunity. Just type it in the chat and Robert will be your, I was going to say your mouthpiece, but I don't know if I like that terminology. Well, Robert will be your voice. Maybe that's more appropriate. And then the other person that's a champion of our TELCoP is Daryl Clare. I'm not sure if Daryl's here today, but if you go back and have a look at our YouTube channel, you'll see that he's the man on the ground. He's the one that always talks us through the practical stuff of how to actually use technology enhanced learning in practice. And so if you look at our YouTube channel, there are some boot camps and workshop sessions from Daryl. That's really his strength. But the lady of the hour, I guess, is Jenelle. And as I said, Dr. Jenelle Benson is from the Centre of Teaching and Learning at Southern Cross University and worked in academic skills. So she is a lecturer there. And prior to that, worked at my alma mater, which is Griffith University, working in their graduate diploma program. There's a little bit more in there, and if you Google Jenelle, you'll find a lot more about her research interests and all of those things. It is, of course, Dr. Jenelle Benson, so she has a bunch of research interests as well. But as I said, what we're really interested in her talking to us about today is Southern Cross University's approach to their blended format, which they're kind of known for, and generative AI and some of those best practices in Gen AI. So usually at this point, I chuck up a silly photo of the person, right? If I can find a silly photo of the person. As I get to presenters I don't know as well, it's harder for me to find silly photos of the person. And Jenelle's done a very good job of making sure that there are no silly photos of Jenelle. I don't think, anyway, out there on the internet. And so instead, as a proxy, I included this picture here, which is the campus on the Gold Coast. Now, Jenelle told me she actually doesn't quite work at that campus. She works a little bit further south, I think. But I wanted to show you that photo of the campus anyway. That's what in her signature, that's where she works, the Gold Coast campus of Southern Cross University. And the main reason I found you that photo is you can see how bloody close it is to the beach, which is so exciting. And
I surf in those waves, so that counts.
Oh, there you go. And before we started recording, Jenelle was telling me that if you're lucky enough to have an office in one of the top parts of that blue building there, then you literally get a beach view, which is very exciting. So that's it for me, rattling on and talking to you. So I'm going to hand over to Jenelle now without any further ado. And I think she's going to start by sharing her screen. So I'll stop sharing so that Jenelle can do that. And if you have any trouble, oh, no, there we go. Awesome. I'll put myself on mute. Over to you, Jenelle.
Excellent. All right. So my name's Jenelle Benson, and I am a teacher in the Center, or an academic in the Center of Teaching and Learning for Southern Cross University. I've been at Southern Cross University for about 6.5 years. I have had a, as you can tell, I am not originally from Australia, so I'm actually from the US, and I had 16 years of teaching STEM courses. That's in high school and doing advanced placement, so that's teaching uni courses at high school. And when I moved over to Australia in 2007, I began teaching at TAFE, and I actually was teaching and managing the innovation. So we were putting courses online, and I was working with IT and business. And at that point, I actually moved, and I was working still in TAFE, but with UniLearn, which actually came from CQU. And so those are bridging courses that I was teaching into and managing, and those are STEM, so math, science, and some English. And then I moved on to Griffith, where I was teaching math and science capstone units and IT units, and then I taught chemistry at UQ. And so I've kind of jumped around to a few different places, went back to teaching at Palm Beach Currumbin, where I was teaching the accelerated math and science programs, and then landed in SCU as an academic skills lecturer, so for focusing mostly on mathematics. And I now am in academic practice where I work with education, faculty of science, engineering, and IT. And Guinea. So I also work with the Indigenous College, and I do research with elders. So I do want to give a shout out to the Bundjalung country that I am sitting on and teach and work from. So I have a very windy road getting there, and I have kind of a background across lots of things, but technology and using it to enhance learning online is one of my passions. I think that there's lots of great tools out there. So at Southern Cross University, I'm going to talk about three things. First, the Southern Cross University policy on generative AI, our assessment cycle process, and teaching and learning with Gen AI. All right, so first, let's look at Southern Cross's approach. Oh, wrong one. There you go. I have lost a document. There we go. Okay, so Southern Cross University, we have an open use policy for generative AI. So initially it's not a you can't use it, it's a you can use it as long as you acknowledge it and cite it. However, that does have, a few little things on there. So you need to make sure that it doesn't infringe upon the academic integrity policy. So we need to make sure that we take that into account with the open use policy. We want to make sure that we are embracing Gen AI and helping students learn how to use Gen AI. So we have a first principles approach in recognizing that Gen AI is a software that is not inherently good or bad and is a tool that can be used constructively to enhance students and staff efficiencies in the ways they learn and teach. And so that's the first approach. And it's important that SCU supports the ethical use of Gen AI that does not breach the university policy. All right, so SCU has adopted a policy that supports and encourages the use of Gen AI. So that's the base policy. We encourage the use. There are three caveats for it. We want to make sure that we are using it appropriately. So we support and encourage. We make sure that if it has a risk of students not being able to meet what they're supposed to be learning, then it's prohibited. But in most cases, that's not really realistic. And that suitable measures will be implemented to educate about the benefits. So we really want to have an educative approach to supporting students on how to use it effectively and efficiently, ethically, and responsibly. It is a huge disruptor to education right now, but I think of it as like the calculator, Google, the internet. It's another tool, and we just need to teach students how to use it. So we don't have a specific standalone policy. What we've done is we've integrated the approach to Gen AI use across 4 policies. So we've added it to the assessment, teaching, and learning policy, the assessment, teaching, and learning procedures, the academic quality standards and integrity policy, and the academic integrity procedures. And I think this is really important that we did this really early on, because if you don't have a university-wide approach, then it can be very hard for students to get a feeling of what they can and can't do when it just kind of randomly changes from one unit to the next or one course to the next. So here's the policies that we have, and I won't spend too much time on them. You can see that the university supports the use of technology, including generative artificial intelligence technology. So it's gone into the main statement, and then it needs to comply with what is already sat under our policies. The next area is our assessment, teaching, and learning procedures. So any restrictions on the use of particular technologies, including generative AI technologies, tools, or other resources for completing the tasks. So one of the things is that it must include explicit and detailed specifications of any of these restrictions. So you can't just say you can't use it or you can use it. You have to be really specific so students understand black and white and there aren't gray areas. And I know when I was at the Uni Sydney, that was one of the feedback I got from students is that they really didn't like the gray areas that were happening in their universities around using Gen AI. And it really left them feeling, I guess, unsure what they could do. And they would have to constantly ask for every assessment, can I use it? Can I use it? How can I use it? And I think it's important to make sure that students are really aware from the beginning. And so what we've done is we've added in, explicitly defining and enforcing the acceptable limits use of technology, including generative artificial into our teaching and learning. And this actually sits within an assessment brief. So there is now, within the policy, there's an assessment brief that they actually have to put specific statements in. And I'll go over that in just a few slides. And then the last one is the academic integrity policy. And we want unit assessors are required to be able to verify with reasonable certainty that these requirements have been met and academic integrity has not been breached. So if they set limitations or they say you can't use it, they have to actually specify to students how they're going to check. What are they going to do, which is going to let them know that students have or haven't used it. And we do have a Gen AI practice guide, signals of how to assess the Gen AI. And this is a checklist, but it is on its own. It goes along with all the normal academic integrity breaches that also occur. And we've made that really clear for academics that it isn't just a one tool thing that you get to say, oh, you've breached it here, and therefore you've breached Gen AI. Because we all know that doesn't really work. All right, I'm going to discuss the assessment design that we are working through with all of our areas. So one of the things that we have to do is you need to consider Gen AI in assessment design. And even though we want to consider Gen AI in our teaching and delivery, assessment is the first step. That was the topic everybody was worried about. Oh, my assessments, they're going to use it to do my assessments. What am I going to do? So all current assessment tasks are being analyzed. And so we're working through that with all of the faculties in our schools. We're going through all of those Gen AI policies with them. And then we are also looking through all of the assessments. And I liaise with education, faculty of science, engineering, and IT in Guinea. And so in the faculty of science, engineering, and IT, we actually are going through with disciplines and we're sitting in big groups and we're going through every assessment and we are reviewing how we can incorporate Gen AI into every assessment. And so it's a big job, but we're doing it. And this also has to do with the stage of the unit development and the cycle. So depending on, and I'm sure all universities are pretty much like this, you have a cycle of when you can change things and when units get reviewed. And so we're trying to make sure that if you can't really review the entire unit, maybe you're in the cycle where you can at least make some modifications to your assessments to make them more Gen AI resilient. So when I talk about timeframes, we have short timeframes. That means that you actually are outside of the UCMS, which is our university curriculum management system. So you're outside of those dates to make any major changes, but you are still within the area where you can make small changes to your assessment. So you might be able to change the instructions, put some limitations in for Gen AI, kind of rethink how they can use Gen AI to help do some research and be able to build in information around good use of Gen AI. If you're able to do the long time frame, so that means that you actually are within the UCMS timelines, you can have a much better and deeper review of your assessments, which means you can also modify your unit learning outcomes or your intended learning outcomes for the unit or course. And you can also redesign your assessments. You can have some industry input you can actually start incorporating relevant use of Gen AI into your teaching and learning. And so that gives you a much longer time. And so we do have some of those that are happening where we're looking at changes for the 2025 units that are being delivered. So this is our assessment cycle. We have design, analyze, act, inform, educate, check, evaluate. So the design is when you have the long term, and analyze is when it's short term. So what do we mean by design? So this is where you have sufficient time to design assessments from scratch or to rethink your assessments completely. So are you actually using assessments that are Gen AI resilient and would be something that's relevant to industry? Because our jobs now, we need to embrace Gen AI and we need to make it so students, when they graduate, they actually are employable with the skills that they need to use Gen AI tools effectively, efficiently, ethically, and responsibly. So as Gen AI tools continue to advance, it is becoming increasingly difficult to detect instances of Gen AI misuse in assessments, and detections will become increasingly more difficult, even impossible. Dawson argues that if we set restrictions on technologies that are not feasible to detect, the integrity and validity of assessments is likely to be reduced, not enhanced. Therefore, attempting to create assessments that Gen AI tools cannot complete or where we prohibit use is not a sustainable approach to assessments. And so that's kind of what we're putting forward to our academics, is that we really need to accept Gen AI, use it, and not allowing it just isn't sustainable. So instead, assessment should provide opportunities for students to utilize Gen AI tools to support their knowledge and skill development, and learn how Gen AI can and cannot inform the ways in which they complete assessments. So when redesigning assessments, make students aware of how Gen AI can and cannot inform the way in which they respond to tasks. This approach will instruct them in the utilization of current tools and technologies demands in the workplace. This will also remove the difficulty of having to identify prohibited Gen AI use in assessments. So it's making your assessments and your teaching and your learning Gen AI resilient. Analyze. So this is where you kind of analyze your assessments. And one of the things that we're saying is take your assessments exactly as they're written, your instructions, pop them into Chat GPT and see what it gives you. If it gives you a pass, then probably you need to look at your instructions. They might not be robust enough. Your assessment might not be robust enough, and your rubric might need to be more robust. So that means that you need to make your rubric focus on higher order knowledge and skills and not the easy things that Gen AI can answer, and start looking at reflective practice or the process of how they've used Gen AI to complete their task. Then we have ACT. So after you've analyzed and you've determined what you need to do, so whether you can use or not use Gen AI, you have option 1, if Gen AI is a risk, modify the assessment task instructions, or you have option 2, if Gen AI is not a risk within defined limits, set the limits for the use of AI. And then you need to inform. So you need to tell the students what they can and can't do. So if they can use it or not use it. And this is where we have statements that have been put across all faculties. So it is the same statement that they must have in their assessment briefs. And the first one is Gen AI may not be used. So they need to put this statement in there. And they need to explain also underneath this how they are going to detect if they feel that you've used Gen AI. And so this sits in all assessment briefs if they say they can't use it, which we discourage them not to use. And then the second choice is you allow Gen AI use within defined limits. And so then you have a statement that says Gen AI may be used, and it explains that if you're not sure how to or how much you can use Gen AI tools in your studies, contact your unit assessor. And what most unit assessors now are doing is, because that's part of policy, is underneath this, they then are clarifying what the limits are. And so I have some examples of those limits right there. So here's some examples. So within the assessments, they might say you can use Gen AI for research purposes only to generate ideas and gather initial insight. And so these are just some examples of setting those limitations. And one of the things we have stressed with academics is that whatever limitations you put on there, you need to make sure that you can verify with reasonable certainty that these requirements have been met. So you can't have limitations that are far-fetched, that there's no way that they can say, yes, you haven't, or you have. In education, I know that they're providing students with also information on how to safeguard themselves. So to take screenshots, to make sure that they keep track of the prompts they're using, screenshots of documents, so that they're kind of showing their process and when they've used Gen AI and when they have just used other tools. And so that's helpful for students. Okay, and then we need to educate students. And so that is one of the main things that we see as important, is that you, as a university, we are responsible to educate students on the ethical and responsible use of Gen AI. We need to direct them to available resources, and we need to reduce the risk of academic integrity breaches in their assessments. So educating students does all of this. So at Southern Cross University, we use an educative approach to encourage staff and students to use generative AI productively and responsibly. So learning opportunities, including assessment, should foster student capabilities in using emerging technologies, paralleling what is available in the real world, in addition to traditional academic skills, development for information and digital literacy, skills around generative AI literacy should also be developed, such as critical evaluation, as well as effective and responsible use. So we want to make sure that students are aware of what they can do and how the ethical use across their academic, civil, professional, and personal lives will affect the tools that they choose. So with that, there's 4 guiding principles, as you can see, that we use to teach students how to use generative AI technology. So for Southern Cross students, the educative approach needs to include how to avoid academic integrity breaches and academic literacy skill development for staff. And for staff, the sharing of effective practice, ideas, and resources among the teaching community. Okay, then we have a check. Now the check is not actually for students. The check is actually for our unit assessors and our markers. And so this goes off more into the academic integrity area. So we have resources that have been set up to help them understand how to check for signals of Gen AI use. And for markers, it's really important that they look at the assessment briefs. So we've asked them to look at the assessment briefs. We have training that we're putting together. And also for markers to understand that they can't rely on one single piece of evidence or signal of suspicion. So they have to look at multiple things. It can't just be the Turnitin AI report, as we know that's not a reliable indicator. And putting students' work into external third-party software, such as Zero Chat GPT, that's problematic for student privacy issues. And so it's really important that they don't just pop it in somewhere and rely on that piece of information. And so it's educating our markers as well. And then we do an evaluate. So this is the last piece that brings us back around to the design. So we should be using reflective practice to gain insight for future assessments. And we should be looking at it not just for the assessments, but the broader teaching experience, and then incorporating Gen AI into the learning and assessment process. And even though this is novel, it needs to be evaluated. So this is emerging practices that we're working on right now. There aren't really best practices yet. And we have key aspects to consider. So we want to make sure that we reflect upon, Gen AI breaches, the grade distribution, student feedback, and then your own reflections as a teacher as you move forward to redesign your assessments at the next round. And we try to do this continuously. Now, with this, we actually have some new courses. So we have micro-credential that we've just developed within education. And what we've done is from the inception, we have embedded Gen AI into it. So you can see that students will engage in activities that encourage them to use generative AI within activities in ways that provide knowledge and skills to complete some teaching and learning tasks thoughtfully and engagingly. And then we also have it in the embedding Gen AI within the assessment. So assessments are designed to incorporate the use of Gen AI as a way of improving and supporting the learning and design processes that teachers work through in developing effective and engaging learning experiences for mathematics students. So this is within my STEM area. And so those are two things that have been put in to make sure that we are embedding Gen AI from the beginning. And we also have a new unit for using Gen AI in the workplace and FSC. So this will become a first-year unit that all students will take within the Faculty of Science, Engineering, and IT. And it is the use of Gen AI in the workplace, ethical and responsible use of Gen AI tools, legal and other risks associated with using Gen AI for learning and work, and critical evaluation of Gen AI tools and how best to use them. So this will be a unit that will be, we're trying for next year, but I think it'll be 2025 that it gets implemented. But as we develop the content, it'll be kind of thought about within the other units. All right, so I tried to make that references pretty short because we do have lots of questions, I am sure. So I will stop
We do.
sharing.
I'm going to ask everyone to give you a round of applause first. Just, a virtual round of applause. All right. Yeah, there we go. Awesome. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, because that was great. Thank you. Robert he's been collating all the questions, and he and I've been talking in the background about which question he should ask you first. So I think he has a question for you.
Yeah, it's going to be like a two-part, it's kind of looking at the citation protocol you recommend to use. So one is like APA or MLA, because somebody posted that CQU uses the APA guide. But a more pragmatic thing, like when you said you can use APA for generating ideas, or you can use AI for generating ideas, and you can use AI to sort of refresh your writing, to use a term, right? Do you have a different way in which you would cite? Is it like cite CQ, like cited ChatGPT as an idea, and then you state, I wrote this myself, but then it went through ChatGPT and I made edits, because you wouldn't be able to cite everywhere you edited, or it would be crazy.
Right. And so that is actually an area that we have questions right now. I'm the lead person in CTL that is running the Gen AI kind of across the university. And so I actually have a position paper that I'm putting forward to our teaching and curriculum committee. I want a university position, and they're happy to do that. I think that when it comes to any of this, there needs to be a university position and not a faculty position. And so I've asked for clarification on what acknowledgement means, what citing means, and when that needs to take place, because this is something that they want to also have all academic staff using, to be looking at their content and their curriculum and kind of making it read better. And so do we acknowledge it? And my thing is that, yes, we all have to acknowledge if we're using it, and to the extent that we're using it. So if you're paraphrasing out of it and you're taking it and not just cutting and pasting, but as you would with anything, you're actually reading through it and making sure that you're paraphrasing and that it actually meets what it's supposed to say. So putting that human part back into it and making sure that it has the details it's supposed to have. It's not that general vague information that comes out of Gen AI. Then I would say that you are citing it as paraphrasing, just like you would in a journal article that you've read. But then you also need to back that up with actual journal articles to show that you know what you're saying. That, yes, ChatGPT has given me this, but here's actually referenced papers that also are saying the same thing.
Yeah. I'm also worried because like on the second half of that, the generating idea part, I think is going to be the easier part, or the summarizing is going to be the easier part. Like, and ChatGPT is going to take the brunt of things that have existed previously. So, commonly if you submit for a grant or you submit for a paper, the journal will say you need to run this through Grammarly, right? They'll type in it, run this, It's good, but run it through Grammarly. And where we're going to stand with run it through ChatGPT. And how do you cite you ran it through ChatGPT in the same way that we kind of say run it through Grammarly, because Grammarly will do rewrites within it. And we currently have no stance on, actually, a lot of people are currently supporting their students putting their text into Grammarly. So
and Grammarly Go also is AI. So
yeah.
So that's what we're asking for the position of the university right now, and we're putting forward our position on it. It's like, if you're just doing research and looking up stuff and getting ideas, outlining, do you need to acknowledge it? Do you acknowledge that on anything else that you use that has any sort of, Grammarly, Google, any of that? You don't acknowledge it. You don't acknowledge all the other things that you've looked at to create your stuff. So do you have to acknowledge it with ChatGPT? I kind of think no. You're using the same tools. I think that if you're paraphrasing or you're actually having it write part of your stuff, that's a whole nother issue. And then, yes, you do need to be showing your prompts and your train of thought and how you have critically evaluated the information and how you've gotten to where you're at with what you're actually putting forward.
Going to be very large appendices.
Yes, and that's another thing we're saying. Do you just need the prompts and you don't need all the other stuff?
It's going to be very
yeah. I had this conversation. I've got a slightly different question for you, Jenelle, but just before I get to it, I think I've mentioned in this forum before that I had a conversation with some librarians at one point who as librarians do, suggested that we should do more attribution. And to Robert's point, that we're getting to the point where we need to do some attribution of the tools, because the tools are doing more of the work for us in terms of, we never thought about attributing something to Microsoft Word when it was just fixing our spelling. But now, now that these AI tools are reorganizing our entire sentences, and as Robert said, summarizing our work and making it sound differently toned, these librarians in particular are making the argument that we need to start at providing attribution to those tools as well. But of course, also asking how are we going to do that, which is a challenge. And as you guys just highlighted, it's almost this idea that there's an entire first page at the beginning. These are all the tools I used. I used Photoshop to do this on my images, and I used, it's a bit crazy, right?
Yeah, because if we start saying with Gen AI, if we start saying, oh, now you've got to acknowledge every time you've used it or all the different Gen AI tools, we never did that before with using, if you used Grammarly to edit it, if you've used, Google to look up stuff, if you have used Photoshop to do images, if you used Excel to create, some information. It's like none of that has ever been put in there before. But now suddenly we're going, Gen AI, okay, now we have to acknowledge everything. So now then, do we need to go retrospectively back and now we have to acknowledge everything, every little click that we've done on our computer? I think that's a little drastic.
Fair enough. Let's segue into something slightly different. Okay, so you won't realize this, but when I look at who's in the room today, there's actually a lot of heads of courses and heads of college at CQU, right? And I also know that our director of learning and teaching, she's the director of learning design and innovation at CQU, Kate Ames, sent me an email and said, Mike, I'm not going to be able to make it, but can you send me the recording afterwards? So hi to Kate in the future. She might watch the recording. But the reason I bring all of that up is obviously part of what you're talking about is this open use policy and this idea of sort of encouraging the uni to say, well, unless you specifically say you're not allowed to use these tools, we're going to say to students, you should be able to use those tools. I asked the heads of college and course in the chat, what do people think of this open use policy? And nobody responded, right? So but I'm going to ask you, how did you go getting that across the executive, getting it as something that the university was interested in doing? Because I've got to imagine that there would be a little bit of fear from people, that a few people would want to say, no, let's just ban the whole thing.
There were, but luckily at SCU, our executives are wholeheartedly want this embraced. They see this as a tool of the future, as a tool, as a way forward for education, that this is not going away. It's just going to get better. And people are already using it in the workforce. The industry that we worked with on that micro-credentialing unit, they were so excited when I said, hey, actually, I'd like to put Gen AI into this and I want to embed it from the beginning. And they were like, oh, that's great. We're already using it in the education sector in secondary schools. So we would love to have this actually in there. And we just have a vet medicine one that's going up, and we are embedding Gen AI in the CLOs, the course learning outcomes. And the vet tech is going to have the same thing. So new courses running going forward will have generative AI embedded in the actual course as part of what students will get out of the course. And I think that's really important because Gen AI is just going to advance. It's going to get more important in the workplace, and us being able to have students that come out and can interrogate the information, understand what is real, what's not. So where the stories are being told and made up and where the actual facts are is really important. You're going to have industry people that are going to be relying on these people to be critically evaluating what information they're getting out for marketing, for facts, for all of that. And we really need to create these students that have that basis, have that understanding, and can go forward into the workplace and say, hey, yeah, I have those skills. I actually can look at the different prompts that you're going to put in there and how we get the information out that we need and back it up with actual relevant journal articles and stuff that this is actually true. And I think that that's where we're moving. And it has to be a kind of like when the calculator came out and everybody was like, oh my God, we're ruining people. They'll never know math again. And then we went, oh, we'll just teach them how to do maths with the calculator. And it, you know, the whole perspective changed. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a little bit easier. We can just show them how to do this instead. We have to do that with Gen AI. It's like, it's not, it's like, okay, how can we make our job easier? How can we help students learn faster? It's great for if students don't understand a question, they can go in there and they can type in different prompts to kind of get clarification, then go, oh, I get it. Okay. You know, it kind of supports the learning. We just have to make sure that what's being put in it's not junk in, junk out, but it actually is getting good stuff put in so that it's learning on good things. And then we're getting good stuff back out. And I think that's where we have to teach students about evaluating the information effectively.
Yeah, I work with Kristen and Jason Lodge and the Cradle group with this AI stuff. And one of the things that I support with them wholeheartedly is we got to be careful of the calculator metaphor because we keep using it. However, the calculator can't solve the problem without you. Yep. And the calculator can't solve the problem if you have no knowledge of mathematics. However, ChatGPT can write a paper if you have no knowledge on the content. And it can, so we got to go, yes, in the way that came out, but we've got to keep separate so that we don't think, let's use it like the calculator, because it's really astronomically different. However, in that same vein, I do agree we have to learn how to interact with it. I think the biggest reason that we are currently having administration struggles and HOC struggles is because, you know, everything is going to come down to what can you prove? And to say you can't use ChatGPT is going to be very hard to prove when you fail a student or accuse them of cheating and try to kick them out of a university, and then they sue, and then it doesn't go as well as you want. And they're realizing at the top, this is not so easy to just say, because the false positives are 60%. Like the
Yes.
false positives in the research are super high. And what happens is if you use it now, it's funny because I'm on editing and I can't tell you how many people see an article or a journal, and if they think that's ChatGPT, that's like a first go-to thought now. And that is going to be a future struggle. I'm going to try something. If David wants to share a quick thing, but if Dave can do it like 3 or 4 minutes, not long, but David wanted to share something. You have to unmute David so that we can hear you though. Okay, so he didn't hear me say he has to unmute. He's just talking with me.
No, you're still muted.
Still muted. He's going to lose all of his 3 minutes in the muting process.
There we go. You're right. Can you hear me?
We got you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks, David.
Okay. Very quickly, there is. I'm taking over a unit next term. It's got as a heritage from COVID, a 3-day take-home exam, open book, that I really resent marking because it could be ghostwritten or AI. And so I've devised, in discussion with Ed Design, an assessment that is not being taken. I think they want to keep the same assessment. And my assessment was to put an article, reflective essay, to respond to a question, and then have an AI answer, and then a critique of the AI answer as a way of embedding AI in that, and really forcing the students to really think back into what they've learned, as opposed to what could be trawled from the web. Yeah,
but just remember, AI will critique itself.
Oh, I can do that. I've done that. Yeah, exactly.
It will critique itself. It does struggle with reflection and stories that because it doesn't know how to generate your stories, but it'll say whether it wrote something good or not.
But the point is, it doesn't know the particular theory that's been taught during the term, and that's the difference.
Yes,
I'm noticing that with some of mine. Jenelle, are there any highlights that you want to give us from SCU? You mentioned the short term and the long term. Is there anything people that are working on long term that's similar to what David mentioned that you might want to share?
Yeah, so with the short term, we have a lot of academics that are, the first thing was, prohibit it, and then they realize that it's really difficult to tell if they've used it or not. So you can't really prohibit it. You need to be Gen AI resilient in your assessment. So that means you actually need to incorporate it in. And so there's a lot of them that are now bringing in the Gen AI tools, putting questions and prompts into it as they're teaching, and then using it to have students interrogate that answer and looking at the answer and looking at what has been taught in the class, and will that actually meet, does that grab the details out? And most students are going, oh no, it hasn't mentioned this, it hasn't done that. And so kind of showing them the shortfalls of it, that yes, you could get a general idea, but then you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to put in those details because ChatGPT doesn't know those details. And
Paul,
and I think that's good.
Was it moved it? I couldn't see his name, but one of the people in the chat keeps saying we keep talking about ChatGPT, but there are other ones.
100%.
And one of the things is the Bing ChatGPT, which ironically uses ChatGPT because behind it. But if you do and search and say write an article, it searches the internet for sources, puts the internet sources in, and they are accurate, and it is thought conducive. And someone misquoted ChatGPT 5 and 6. 6, that there has been some researchers talking about the fear is if ChatGPT gets to EBSCO, or if they get access to some of these large research databases, it's going to be able to start citing accurately.
Yeah, well, that's Sparrow in Google also.
Yeah. So what we just, one of the things I keep saying to people that I think is so important is we're very knee-jerk very quickly. This is going to take time for us to figure out how to adapt to it, because it's going to change faster than we understand how to use it. And we have to start thinking differently about the way in which we think about assessment, period. And the difference between assessing skills and tasks, and when it's interesting because even in my, mentioned this a bunch of times, but in my undergrad, they wanted to discern if we could write well. And what they did was every first year student had to show up and take a in-person written test. They gave us 2 passages. We had to read them. We could take notes on them. And really what they were doing was like, this is the skill. Now that you have this skill, you're going to go on to other classes and do essays and write. But you don't get out and get to those classes until you show us you have this skill mastered and that you have it at a level you can do. And the other thing is I was going to share, because a lot of people keep talking about adapting to the workforce. It was very interesting how the computer really changed what an administrative assistant does. And I think now the computer is going to be the new administrative assistant. People that used to just talk to people and say, write a note, write an email, or write this for me and send it off. They're now just going to ChatGPT, write an email for this, and it does. And a lot of their work time is being saved, going back to having a digital EA opposed to the 1950s, if you will, 1960s definition, where the EA just listened to what you said and produced a letter for you.
Well, it also is really great about broaching. Let's say you have a really sensitive topic and you're not quite sure how to start it with someone. You know, it can give you ideas on that, which is really nice if you're in the workplace and you're like, oh, I really need to talk to this person about this critical, you know, incident, and it will help with that. And I know Grammarly Go, that's what they're training it. Like, you can put your own writing into it and you can train it so that when it writes emails, it actually writes it for how you write emails. So it's not doing it itself. So that's Grammarly Go has that AI part, and it's all about training it to be more like you, how you write. And that right now
that's interesting.
Yeah, so that is only available. It's beta right now. Our university has it turned off, and I'm questioning whether we should turn it on. There's also Zoom, which has the AI companion, which doesn't happen to be in our Zoom package, which I'm looking into. So Zoom has an AI companion, which can help you. It will give you a summary of the meeting. So it'll look at all the transcripts and everything. It gives you a summary of the meeting. It will write questions if you would like. You can, look at all the questions that have been asked. It'll give you the general idea of what people wanted to know. And then you also have Teams Copilot. So there's a Copilot in Teams now. So this is something that it's not going away. It's just going to get more and more and more. And we need to actually be using the tools ourselves so that we can educate the students on how to use them, because they're using them. A lot of them are already using them.
I think so too. I think I'm marking my assignments at the moment, and yeah. I read in the chat, I won't attribute this hot take to you. I will totally attribute it to Robert, that Robert's hot take is apparently that ChatGPT will kill the humble admin assistant. It's kind of sounds like you're saying the same thing, Jenelle, but let's not get too controversial.
I don't think so. I think it's going to change their role. I think that's where people are, it's going to kill these jobs. I don't think it's going to do that. I think what it's going to do, it's going to change the role and change the skills that they need. Because you can just have it pop out an email, but you actually need to look at that and make sure that before you send it, it actually says what it needs to send. So they're going to have some higher order thinking skills and problem solving and critical evaluation skills to make sure that when they pop that email off, oops, sorry, that said the wrong thing.
That's very diplomatic.
Michael likes to always throw me under the bus with everything he says about me.
I always try.
I was just talking about not in the business field. There was a shift when the computer came about, and I think ChatGPT is going to make another shift.
And that's what Jenelle said as well. It's just going to be another shift. One more question. I want to segue to something slightly different. There's a few people, including Robert's wife, asked about a little bit about workload and a little bit about CQU supporting academics with generative AI into the future. And whilst I know I've got to be careful, because obviously, Jenelle, you can't answer questions about how CQU can support academic workload, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Like, how did you make sure that staff felt supported at SCU? Were there any changes to the way that you cover staff's marking allocation or anything like that, or is that still kind of something you guys
we're actually looking at that right now, because what we have noticed is that prior to Gen AI, the workload on markers was here, and with Gen AI it's actually here, because they're having to go through and check all those assessments that say you can't use it, you can't use it, which is one of the reasons why you need to just stop saying you can't use it and need to incorporate it in, because there's a whole lot more work to try to verify that they haven't used Gen AI when you suspect they have, than if there's limitations put around, you go, okay, yep, that's good. But there is some review of the policy right now over markers jobs and UA's jobs, just because Gen AI has changed that workload. And so we need to rethink it. And yeah, that's about where we're at right now.
That's about where you're at, yeah.
The question in the long run is, the policy has changed, but without training, the actual marking isn't changing.
Yes, and so that's where we're running training for markers now too. We're setting up stuff for trainers for our partnership people also. So we have a program going forward, which is going to train all of our partnerships like Educo and all of our offshore partners that do marking, and not only to help them understand, Gen AI, but to help them be a little more efficient. So we're actually looking at using Gen AI for writing rubrics. Of course, you have to go in and modify them, but to give the basic outline of it, looking at feedback, looking at writing some of your reports that you might have to do, and just the things that you can have it help academics do to reduce their administrative workload.
Oh, wow. Annual unit enhancement reports never occurred to me that I could get ChatGPT to write the hours for me. That's, yeah, let's keep that between us. But wow, that's a good idea. I know we've only got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to ask you one more question, Jenelle, just to finish us off. And this is a tricky one. So imagine for a second that, you've got your crystal ball in front of you, and, we're talking about education and what you do in the Center for Teaching and Learning at SCU, and what we do in Central Learning and Teaching Education. How have things changed in 10 years? What does it look like in 10 years? What does TEL look like in 10 years? If you've got any sense of that, and we won't hold you to it. Like, if you're totally wrong, that's fine. But I'm just interested in what you think it's going to look like in, say, a decade.
So in a decade, Gen AI is going to be doing a lot more of our work, but we still have to have that human evaluative, interrogative process. But we'll be getting to have shorter work days. Shorter work days, more surfing time. Wouldn't that be great? And we'll have people who actually can communicate better. I think that's one thing we have to think about, is that ChatGPT actually will help us communicate better, because it will write more effectively, clearly, coherently, so that we're getting across what we want to get across. I mean, how many times you've read papers from students and they just ramble on. You're like, what are they talking about? So hopefully this will help make that communication better, especially within corporations and businesses. They will have better communication. And I think that it will improve the jobs that we do. So it's going to change our jobs, and a lot of that stuff that I guess we would consider mundane, hopefully it will be able to do that. It's kind of like we don't go out and hunt and gather our food anymore. We go to the grocery store. So, how many hours has that taken us away besides the whole shopping trip? But, we don't have to go out. We don't have to go and gather all of our food and go hunt our animals. And we don't have to, slaughter them and do all that stuff so that we have food on the table. We don't have to go and carry our water. So we kind of have to look at what is it going to get rid of that's going to free us up to do other great things. So I think it's going to help innovate what we do also in the future.
Ooh, that's awesome. That's a very positive outlook. I like that. Better communication and ultimately a higher quality of life. I think that's in stark contrast to some of the panic that people have been going through over the last 12 months or so. Okay, we are over. We are just over the hour. So I'm going to first of all, I'm going to say to you, Jenelle, a couple of people in the chat did say it would be great if we answered some of the other questions in the chat. We're obviously out of time. I'll send the meeting text to you, and it's up to you. The other thing is, are you okay with people touching base with you outside of this session? If people went, Janelle, got some great ideas, find you on the internet, send you an email or whatever, you're happy with that kind of thing?
Yep.
Excellent.
Yep.
Excellent.
No problem.
Not a problem. So, so apart from that, I'm just going to say let's wind up. We're losing people quickly because we're over the hour. So once again, another virtual round of applause for you. Thank you so much, Jenelle, for your
Thank you.
time. Really appreciate it. And ladies and gentlemen that are still here, as I said, this may be our last TELCoP of the year, or there may be one more. I haven't quite decided yet, and Robert and I haven't quite decided yet. If there is one more, it'll be in roughly 6 weeks, and you'll see an announcement from me. Otherwise, have a really good summer break, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll see you back again for the TELCoP in 2024. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.